On the morning of January 20th, 1954, a weather observer at a mining camp near Rogers Pass, Montana, walked outside to read a thermometer. Snow had been falling almost continuously for a week. The day before, the temperature had climbed all the way up to 18 below zero. Then, late in the day, the snow stopped, the wind died, and the sky went clear. The number he wrote down was 70 degrees below zero. The Weather Bureau did not believe it. They sent people out, checked the instruments, cross-referenced nearby stations, and interviewed the observers. On March 16th of that year, they made it official. Minus 70 is still the coldest temperature ever recorded in the continental United States. 72 years later, the record has never been broken. That mine sat 3/4 of a mile from where Montana Highway 200 crosses the pass. There is a marker on the road today, and that is what every road on this list has in common. 9 Montana highways where the thing that kills people is not the crash, and where the difference between an inconvenience and a fatality is a number on a thermometer. Here is the number that should stop you. More than 80% of Montana's traffic fatalities happen on rural roads. That is among the highest rural shares in the entire country. Coming up, a highway 660 miles long where the average ambulance response time is 80 minutes. A stretch of interstate that has more deaths from one specific cause than almost anywhere in America. And a road at number 1 where the fuel in your tank stops being a liquid. So here's the quiet contradiction at the heart of all 9 of these roads. Every one of them is easy driving. Picture the drive the way you would actually make it. 2 lanes of good asphalt. 70 miles an hour posted, 80 on the interstate. Sight lines that run to the horizon. Mountains 100 miles away that stay in exactly the same place for an hour. It is some of the most beautiful driving on this continent, and it asks almost nothing of you. That is exactly the problem. Danger you can see, you slow down for. Ice, fog, a hairpin turn, a construction zone. Your foot moves before your brain finishes the thought. None of these roads give you that. They give you an empty road and a clear night and a temperature you cannot feel from inside a heated cab. And here is the one fact I want you to hold on to, because we come all the way back to it at the end. On these roads, you do not have to crash to die. Hold on to that one. Let's count it down. Number 9, US 212, the Beartooth Highway. When I first drove the Beartooth between Red Lodge and Cook City, I climbed above the tree line and stopped counting switchbacks. Here's the wildcard fact. This road runs about 69 miles and tops out at nearly 11,000 feet, roughly 1,000 feet above the tree line. Now here's what people get wrong. Everyone assumes this road is dangerous because of the drop-offs, and the drop-offs are real. But look at what being above the tree line actually means. There is no shelter. Not less shelter, none. No trees to block wind, no terrain to duck behind, and no structures for tens of miles in either direction. Which means a breakdown up there is not a roadside event. It is an exposure event at 11,000 feet, where the temperature can fall 30 degrees between an afternoon and a midnight in the same day. The road closes for winter for exactly this reason. The trouble is the shoulder seasons, when it is open and the weather has not agreed to it. 69 miles, 11,000 feet, and absolutely nothing up there to get behind. Number 8, US 93 along Flathead Lake. When I first drove US 93 up the east side of Flathead Lake, it was the prettiest hour of driving I had done in the state. Here's the wildcard fact. When this highway was rebuilt through the Flathead Reservation, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes refused to let it be widened the conventional way. The agreement that came out of it produced dozens of fish and wildlife crossing structures along the corridor, one of the most extensive systems of its kind in North America. The tribe's stated principle was that the road is a visitor, and it should behave like one. Now here is why that matters for a video about night driving, and it is not sentimental. Wildlife crossings work. Well-designed structures with proper fencing can cut collisions dramatically along the sections they cover, but they cover sections. A crossing protects the mile it is built on, and the animal walking 2 miles north of it has no idea the structure exists. So a corridor like this produces something drivers are genuinely bad at handling. Variable risk. 10 miles that are engineered and fenced, then 5 that are not, with no change in the pavement, the speed limit, or anything else you can see. Your attention does not modulate. It sets once at the start of a road and holds. Engineered crossings, fenced sections, and an animal that never read the plan. Number 7, Montana 200. When I first drove Montana 200 across the middle of the state, I understood why Montanans talk about it the way they do. It runs most of the width of Montana and passes through country where you can drive an hour without a town. Here's the wildcard fact. This is the road that crosses Rogers Pass. The marker for the coldest temperature ever recorded in the lower 48 is right there on the shoulder of this highway. That record was not set in a blizzard. That is the part worth understanding. It was set the day after the storm ended. Snow had fallen for a week, and then the wind stopped and the clouds cleared. And on a clear, calm night over deep snowpack, heat radiates straight up into space with nothing to hold it down. The cold air pools in the low ground and simply sits there, which produces something genuinely counterintuitive. The most dangerous night out here is not the stormy one, it is the beautiful one. Clear sky, no wind, stars everywhere, perfect visibility, dry pavement. That is the night the temperature falls off a cliff. Longest road in the state, a record nobody has broken since Eisenhower's first term. And the coldest nights arriving in the best weather. Number 6. US 87 and the Central Montana 2 lanes. When I first drove US 87 out of Great Falls, the road was so straight and so empty I had to check my speed twice. Here's the wildcard fact. Montana's fatal crash profile is dominated by a specific pattern: single vehicle, run off the road, rural, at night. And two contributing factors show up over and over in the state's own numbers. Seatbelt use in Montana runs around 74%, against a national average closer to 87%. And alcohol is documented in roughly a third of the state's traffic deaths, with some analyses putting it above 40%. Now here's the comparison that matters, and it is not a lecture about seatbelts. In a city, an unbelted occupant in a single vehicle crash gets found within minutes. The crash is survivable and the response is fast, so the belt is the difference between injury and worse injury. Out here, the response is not fast, which means the belt is doing a completely different job. It is not just reducing injury, it is determining whether you are conscious afterward and whether you are still inside a vehicle that has heat, shelter, and a horn. Straight road, empty road, and a crash nobody witnesses. Number 5. Interstate 15 north of Great Falls. When I first drove Interstate 15 north toward the Canadian border, the wind was pushing my vehicle and there was nothing out there to break it. Here's the wildcard fact. This is the corridor where Arctic air comes south. There is no terrain between the Canadian prairie and central Montana to slow it down, which is why the state's most extreme cold events arrive from this direction and settle across the plains. And here's what that does to a vehicle, which almost nobody outside cold country thinks about. A running engine makes heat, a stopped engine makes none. On a normal breakdown, that is a comfort issue for the 20 minutes until help arrives. At 30 below, an unheated cab equalizes with the outside air far faster than people expect. The metal, the glass, and the air inside all go to ambient. There is no residual warmth in a truck because there is no insulation in a truck. It is a steel box. So the calculation reverses. Everywhere else, you stay with the vehicle and wait. Here, staying with the vehicle only works if the vehicle is running. Open plains, Arctic air with nothing in its way, and a cab that is only warm while the engine is. Number 4. US 191 through Gallatin Canyon. When I first drove US 191 south from Bozeman through the Gallatin Canyon, I was in a narrow river gorge with rock on one side and water on the other. Here's the wildcard fact. This corridor carries enormous seasonal traffic to Big Sky and toward Yellowstone, on a 2-lane road with limited passing and very little room to recover from anything, which creates the same visitor problem this channel keeps running into, in a new form. The traffic here is disproportionately people who do not live here, heading to a resort, heading to a park, driving a rental, and frequently driving it in the dark after a late arrival at Bozeman. And a canyon does something specific after sunset. It closes off your peripheral vision entirely. There is no distant horizon to reference, no glow from a town, and the walls throw your headlights back at you. Add ice in the shaded sections, which the sun does not reach for months at a time, and you get pavement that is dry in one curve and black in the next. Rock on one side, river on the other, and no way to see anything that is not directly in front of you. Number 3. Interstate 90. When I first drove Interstate 90 across southern Montana, I could see why it carries most of the state's freight and most of its tourists. Here's the wildcard fact. Montana's Interstate 90 has repeatedly ranked among the most dangerous stretches in the country for drunk driving fatalities, and a Montana Highway Patrol sergeant put it about as plainly as it can be put. It is not the road that is dangerous, it is the volume of people using it. And there is a structural point underneath that which is worth being fair about. This interstate is genuinely well built, divided, barriered, controlled access, engineered to move traffic at 80. Nationally, interstates have the lowest fatality rate of any road class, somewhere around half a death per 100 million miles, against 2 to 4 on rural local roads. So when a road this well-designed still produces those numbers, the road has almost nothing to do with it. Something else is driving the outcome. The state's own analysis of its deadliest 10-mile segments puts 2 of the worst on this interstate near Missoula. Best engineered road in the state, highest speeds in the state, and a set of numbers the engineering cannot explain. Number 2, US 2, the High Line. And number 2 is the road I promised you at the start. When I first drove US 2 across northern Montana from the North Dakota line westward, I went through country where the towns are 40 miles apart and half of them are smaller than they were on the map. Here's the wildcard fact. US 2 runs over 660 miles across the top of the state, and it has more fatal crashes than any other road in Montana, an average of about 13 fatal crashes a year. But that is not the number that puts it at number 2. This is. On US 2, the average ambulance response time is 80 minutes. 80 minutes. Average, which means half of everyone waits longer than that. And here is what makes that number worse than it already sounds. In this particular state, on this particular list. Everywhere else, a long response time is a survival problem for the injured. Out here, it is also a survival problem for the uninjured. 80 minutes is a very long time to be sitting in a stopped vehicle in northern Montana in February. It is long enough for a cab to reach ambient. It is long enough for fuel to cold soak. It is long enough that the person waiting for help can end up in worse condition than the person the ambulance was called for. Which means on the High Line, the response time is not just the answer to how quickly you get treated. It is the length of the exposure everybody at the scene has to survive first. The Center for Excellence in Rural Safety has flagged this highway specifically for its abnormal fatality rate. 660 miles, 13 fatal crashes a year, and 80 minutes standing beside the road before anybody arrives. Number 1, Montana's northern 2 lanes in deep winter. And honestly, number 1 is not a single road. It is a condition, and it can happen on almost every road in this video. When I first heard a Montana driver describe it, he did not talk about ice at all. He talked about fuel. Here's the wildcard fact. Diesel fuel contains paraffin wax. Above a certain temperature, that wax stays dissolved and the fuel flows normally. Below it, the wax crystallizes, and those crystals collect on the fuel filter and starve the engine. Standard number 2 diesel typically reaches that cloud point somewhere around 6 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on the blend and where you bought it. Keep dropping, and you reach the pour point, where the fuel is barely flowing at all. Read those numbers again against a Montana January. 20 degrees is not a cold night here. 20 degrees is a mild one. This is exactly why fuel suppliers in cold country blend number 1 into number 2 through the winter, and why the guidance is to switch to straight number 1 below 30 below. It is also why a truck fueled in a warmer state can run perfectly for 800 miles and then quit in Montana. And here is why it is number 1, and it is the thing nobody plans for. Gelling does not happen while you're driving usually. It happens after you stop. The engine cools, the fuel in the lines and the filter cold soaks, and the truck that carried you to that shoulder will not start again to carry you off it. You did not crash. You did not do anything wrong. You pulled over at 40 below on a road with 4 cars an hour on it, and the vehicle quietly stopped being an option. No crash, no mistake. And a fuel tank full of something that is no longer a liquid. So here's the actual answer. The one all 9 of these have been building toward. Every danger you naturally respect hands you a signal your body already knows. Ice makes the wheel go light. Fog you can watch closing in. A curve you can see coming. Rain you can hear on the roof. Your foot lifts off the gas before you've consciously decided anything. Not one hazard on this list does that. And the reason is that in Montana, in winter, the crash is optional. That is the distinction that makes this state different from every other hard driving place in America. On most dangerous roads, the sequence runs one way. Something goes wrong, you crash, and then the question becomes how long help takes. Here, you can skip the first 2 steps entirely. A flat tire is a crash. An alternator is a crash. A gelled fuel filter is a crash. Anything that stops the engine produces exactly the same situation as rolling a vehicle into a ditch, because the engine was never just propulsion out here. It was the heater. And the temperature does not negotiate. Ice, fog, and wind all take something away from you and give you a chance to react. Cold takes nothing away. It starts a clock the moment the engine stops, and it runs at the same rate whether you're hurt or perfectly fine, which is the honest answer to why the title says alone. Everywhere else, a second person mostly shortens the time before somebody knows where you are. Out here at 40 below, a second person is a second body's worth of heat, a second engine that might still start, and somebody awake while the other one sleeps. The clock is not measured in days, it is measured in hours. So, if you are ever the one making these drives, do the small, unglamorous things. Treat your fuel before the cold, not during it. Anti-gel additive prevents crystals forming and cannot reverse them once they have. Never let the tank get low in winter. Less air means less condensation and less water to freeze in your lines. Carry a sleeping bag rated for the actual temperature, not a blanket. A blanket is a comfort item. A bag is equipment. Tell one person your route and the hour you expect to be off it, and out here, mean the hour. None of that is exciting. All of it works. Come back one last time to that morning at Rogers Pass. A man walking out to a thermometer at a mining camp the day after a storm, under a clear sky with no wind at all. The prettiest possible morning, 70 below. He wrote the number down and nobody believed him for 2 months. And that is the real number here. Not 80 minutes, not 660 miles, not 13 fatal crashes a year. It is a marker on the shoulder of Highway 200, on a road people drive every day at 70 miles an hour with the heater on, past the single coldest place ever measured in this country. Most of them never slow down for it. There is no reason to. It is just a sign. Now remember what I asked you to hold on to. On these roads, you do not have to crash to die. That is the whole thing. And it is why the drivers who live here prepare the way they do. They are not worried about the corner. They are worried about the shoulder, about being stopped, upright, uninjured, in a vehicle that will not start. The cold out there is not hunting anybody. It has never needed to. It arrives off the Canadian prairie every winter, the way it always has, and it settles into the low ground on the clearest and calmest nights of the year. It does not care that you are fine, it only cares that you stopped.